Well, it looks like class is once again in session. Hello friends, and thank you for joining me for another brand new video. This one's going to be a bit of a departure from what you're used to normally seeing, and I tell you why. I sat down today, actually, at the time of recording this, with one of my patrons to record a lesson with him. And I always record lessons when I give them because I like to give the students something to be able to reference back to. So as part of whenever people book in for a lesson with me, a video is part of what you're getting in what you pay for. But I thought that this one was actually a little bit interesting because we were doing some Adeptus Custodes, and the colour scheme that he'd chosen was like black, red, gold, silver. And so it kind of included a lot of fundamentals all in one thing. And I decided to go over this with him just by sort of teaching him the workups and giving him opportunities to ask questions. It was also really, really nice for us to just have a little catch up while we were doing it. So what's coming up is A, it's going to be a very long video for a start. B, there is going to be just some casual chatting amongst it, which might not be for everyone. But what it does do is it serves as a good illustration of what taking a painting lesson might be like. Now, obviously, you know, you have to understand that every lesson with every student is always going to be a little bit different. Some students ask lots of questions, some students don't ask any questions during the lesson but then feedback questions afterwards, and so, you know, it all depends on kind of what happens during the lesson and just, you know, how things go down between the student and the teacher. But I do think that this one is an interesting one. I do think that it's a lesson that contains some cool little workups, and I thought, you know what, it might just be worth sticking it on YouTube and letting some people have some fun with it. So I'm going to stop chatting now, and here comes a very long video of me delivering a painting lesson.
Okay.
So what I'm actually going to do is, because obviously if I were to do a complete start to finish on this miniature with you, that's going to take a really, really long time, and that's also so much information to absorb and remember.
Mm-hmm.
So to try and keep things concise and to try and keep things in such a manner that you can absorb them fairly well, what I'm going to do is just sort of teach you a workup for the four main colours and explain the principles of why we do that, and then you're sort of free from there to go and apply that to the rest of the miniature as you see fit. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to start with the black, and I have, you can see here, this is a colour from Reaper called Heather Blue. It's basically just a blue-grey. So obviously, remember, with all of this stuff, you can always mix, especially an army like Custodes where you have such small numbers. You don't really need the benefit of consistency that you get from having all pre-mixed paints.
Okay.
So a degree of mixing isn't going to harm the overall look of your army. It's mostly a convenience thing, being able to, you know, just take paint out of the pot. So what I would advise is kind of to mix yourself a kind of nice medium blue-grey, presuming that you don't have one. But if you do have one, then any will do. And what we're going to do to start out with is just get this really nicely thinned down to the point where you see it still covers really well, but it also flows really easily. You can see my brush is more than happy to release paint, which is what tells me that I'm thinned well enough, but the fact that it still covers well tells me that I'm not over thinned.
Okay.
So to start out with, what I want you to do is just get yourself a nice blue-grey mixed like that. And if like me, you have a light that's in that sort of overhead position, then your light will actually tell you where to place highlights on the miniature. So for example, I can see that here is brighter in my miniature.
Oh, I see.
So I can place some highlights here. I can tell that there's going to be just a little kind of track highlight running underneath the breastplate there. I can see that the top of the leg armor here will pick up a highlight. You see? So much.
Let me go grab that blue real quick.
Yeah, no problem. So what I'm doing, I've carried on painting a little bit while you were fetching that paint. But what I'm doing here is basically just blocking in flat colour where the highlights want to live, and I've obtained that information just by using my actual light reflecting off of the miniature. So my light is above the miniature. If I use my brush to point in the direction relative to the miniature, my light is sort of just over there. So it's pretty much top down to the miniature anyway, which is the way we normally light our miniatures for the battlefield. We usually will light stuff in that sort of top down method because it's easy to do it consistently.
Okay.
So the reflections on the surface are actually telling me where to place my highlights, and I can just work in this blue-grey colour to get me nice solid coverage. I'll just concentrate on this leg. And what I would probably suggest is for this test miniature, if you maybe also don't try to complete the miniature while we're doing the lesson.
Okay.
Because obviously you're going to have all the time in the world to go back afterwards and apply what you've learned to the rest of the miniature. So what's probably going to be more beneficial to you, I would have thought, would be to concentrate on nailing the techniques correctly over a small area first, and then you can go and apply them to a wider area of the miniature.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense.
Okay, so for now I've just blocked in this blue-grey in the areas where I want highlights to live. And, you know, we could quite easily start to expand out and you know, look at the rest of the miniature if we wanted to. And it's very easy to obtain information about where these highlights want to live. And once we've obtained that information, we just copy it in with our paint. And there are a lot of ways that you can obtain that information. Like I say, I like to observe my light. Because I use a satin primer, my light will give me that information. But if you, for example, like to use a really matte primer, then you can, with an airbrush or a rattle can, you can spray what's called a zenithal onto the miniature, which is effectively a representation of light at its zenith, impacting on the miniature. And it's the same thing, it's just to give you light information so that you know where to place highlights. The difference is you have to either completely filter over it or completely paint it out afterwards. So I prefer to use the information just provided by my own lighting. But you can see that we've just got these basic blue-grey highlights blocked in. And we don't really need to, like I say, obsess over... I'm just going to put one extra one in just here. We don't really need to obsess too much over highlight placement. It's one of the things that people get really caught up on actually when they start learning to paint miniatures. They sort of become convinced that highlight placement is super duper important to producing a high quality finish. And actually, in practice, our eye wants to read contrast more than anything else. Like, that's what really makes a miniature look like it's popping. Okay, so you've grabbed some basic light information there, and you've applied it to your miniature where you want it to live, okay?
Yeah.
So then from there, obviously that's a really stark highlight, and we don't want a really stark highlight. So what we're now going to do is grab some black paint. I'm just using this Scale 75 Art Black. And
pick myself up one as well.
Excellent, good choice. Good choice. You know I'm a firm believer in those paints. What we're going to do is basically make like a 50-50 mix to start off with of our blue-grey and that black.
Okay.
And black is a very, very strong pigment, so that 50-50 mix will it'll actually come out a lot darker than you expect it to.
Okay.
What you'll probably end up with, you can just about see it on my palette. You see, you'll end up with something like this that is pretty ridiculously dark.
You can still see the blue in that.
Yeah, there's still just a hint of it holding on in there. I mean, fortunately, this Scale 75 black is pretty blue based anyway.
Oh, really?
Some blacks go kind of green, some go kind of purple, some hold on to a hint of blue. It can be a bit of a roulette as to what a black's going to look like, but one of the reasons I like this Scale 75 Art Black is because it has a blue base, which makes it a bit easier for shading and highlighting. What we now want to do is thin this paint right back to a glaze. And what we're basically looking for here is that it holds pretty good transparency. So you can see on my hand here, if I actually paint it over the other paint that's already down, you can see how transparent it is. You can sort of very clearly see that line of grey still through it. And what we're basically going to do here is just start to feather the edges of that blue away. So when we apply a glaze to our paintbrush, the first thing we want to do is actually remove most of it. So you can see with my tissue here, I'm actually turning my paintbrush on the surface of the tissue to get rid of most of the paint. Okay. And the bristles essentially just want to be damp. They don't want to be wet. And then we can just start to gently feather at the edges of that highlight. So we're just sticking purely to the edges of that highlight. Everywhere where the highlight color meets the black. And we're just really gently tickling it in. We can move all around. And the good thing about glazes is that they dry very quickly. So because they dry very quickly, by the time we've sort of done the rounds and moved all the way around the area that we're working on, by the time we sort of get back to the start, it's dry again. We can carry on. So we do a few rounds of this. And what you'll see is it will just start to dither the edge of that blend and make it look less harsh. Start to create a transition into the black. Now, one of the really important things with these glazes, and it's mostly because they're so thin, is we want to always be thinking about the direction of our stroke.
Oh, yeah.
When you apply a glaze, the end of your stroke will always contain more paint than the start of your stroke, because you'll drag paint away from the start of your stroke. So we want to be aiming our strokes away from the grey toward the black, because the black we're still going to shade down further to take it all the way back to black. Whereas the grey, we want that nice sort of transition to appear in it. So we always want to be moving out of the grey.
Okay, makes sense.
And you can see if you look at mine, it's already starting to just get that sort of dithered look around the edges of those highlights. They're starting to, instead of looking like strong, bold, sudden changes in colour, they're now starting to kind of muddle into each other a bit more and look more like a transition than a sudden change. It does require a bit of patience, this, but what I'm trying to teach you here is kind of the longest but most high definition version, I guess. And then from here, you know, it's easy for you to start to be able to find your own shortcuts where you sort of willingly sacrifice a little bit of quality to make up a bit of time. But I always think that, you know, those things are, it's best to let painters discover a lot of that sort of stuff themselves than to try and teach it. Because
so am I continually just shading it in until it's gone, or
yeah, until the edges start to blur. So if you look at the edges, if you just give me a second, I can super zoom on my camera here. You see how the edges of mine now are starting to disappear. So it's now sort of light grey, medium grey, dark grey instead of just light grey and black.
Okay.
So we're just working around those transition points, those areas where the colours connect. And we're just continuing to blur those lines.
Oh, okay. So you start at the edge with a little bit because every time you're going to go back over it and darken it up.
Precisely. Yeah, we're going to just keep working and working and working until we get to a point of it being nice and dithered, blended.
Okay.
I'm just starting to hit that point now on my leg. Starting to hit that point where it's starting to look quite blended. We're still going to do more than this.
Okay. Okay, disregard my... I thought sending you a couple pictures might be a little better so you can see, but I will do that after I am finished then.
Yeah, no, that's fine. If what I tend to do with my students is we'll work through live together, and if I sort of spot stuff while we're working live that I can help with, then I'll sort of point it out to you. But at the end, I'll normally exchange a couple of pictures, and I'll show them mine and they show me theirs, and I'll sort of be able to point out some things from the photos as well.
Okay.
So it's the thing with this kind of stuff is, it needs to be a back and forth process because we can't read each other's minds. So, there's always opportunity to sort of look at things after the fact. We don't have to find everything then and there immediately while we're working.
Okay.
Basically, once I've started to get a nice dither like that, I'm then going to make a black glaze, and I'm going to start to do the same thing.
Oh, just pure black?
Yeah. So now I'm just going to step in a little bit more and start darkening up again.
I think my steps were a little big.
That's okay. That's okay.
But I can really see the difference, though. Like, it's subtle, but you can definitely tell. That's really cool. I mean, obviously you know that because you're doing it.
Well, the really nice thing, especially with working up like this in black, is whilst that grey stage that we did can be a little bit slow, black is such a strong pigment that this second stage where we just drag the dark grey down into black goes very quickly, and it's once we've got this second stage in that we really start to see a bit of a differential appearing in the contrast. So you can see I've started adding some black back into mine now, and I'm really starting to get a noticeable contrast difference. And the big thing here really is just when you simplify your understanding of highlight placement, you can focus more on contrast, and contrast is what's going to work wonders for you. Contrast is going to be what creates those paint jobs that people look at them and go, whoa, how did you do that? Highlight placement is kind of, like I said, it can be kind of done for you. You don't really need to know anything to do highlight placement. And so you can see now I've got quite a good level of contrast. I mean, even if you look at this black area right beside this greave here, my darkest areas are pretty much the same black. I mean, I can maybe go a little bit darker if I want to, maybe, one more glaze. But I'm looking pretty dark.
And for highlighting, it's not you're not just hitting everywhere the light would hit. It's just where the light hits the harshest, right?
Yeah, we're gonna do it all in one process. So this method that I'm showing you sort of shades and highlights your area in one, and that's kind of ideal for like flat plates and armor and stuff like that.
Okay.
So you'll see when we do the gold, we're going to treat the gold completely differently.
Okay.
Because all of our gold areas are going to be highly textured. So it would be pretty painstaking to sit there and kind of pick out all of these individual spots where the light is catching on something that's really highly textured. And it would be a very inefficient way of working. So On the black here, I'm going to show you kind of a method of working that is really well suited to things like your armor plates, your flat panels, your sides of vehicles, that kind of stuff. But then when we get onto the gold, I'm going to start showing you something, and the red as well, actually. I'll be showing you something that works a lot better for your kind of textured painting areas.
Okay. I could really tell the difference to doing a priming. Is that the right term? Priming with the actual paint instead of the spray paint.
Yeah.
Huge difference.
It's an interesting thing with priming plastic miniatures. There's a lot of misunderstanding around how and why you prime. Why is a big thing. People think that priming has a lot to do with protecting the paint finish, ensuring that it stays adhered to the miniature, and that's it's very true when we're talking about metal miniatures, and it's very true when we're talking about very hard surfaces like, you know, like car bodies, for example, which is why when you take your car to be sprayed, they will prime it before they spray it. But when we're talking about soft plastic miniatures and soft resin miniatures, the durability of your finish is not actually that dependent on how it's been primed. You can get much more durability in your finish by varnishing after the prime, by applying a top coat, which is why when we look at things like finishing guitars, for example, they will apply sort of a thin polyurethane primer to give the paint a good surface to adhere to. Okay. But the main protection on the finish of something like a guitar is the like 20 layers of lacquer that go on top of it after all the painting's been done. And obviously wood is a much more comparable material to the plastic that our miniatures are made of than the way that they would treat something like a car body, which doesn't have a million coats of lacquer on top of its paint job, you know. And so what we can learn by understanding why we're priming in miniature painting, because we're painting onto a soft material, our main reason to prime is just keying the surface, which means giving the surface something that subsequent layers of paint can adhere to easily. That's the main purpose for priming a miniature. And so with that in mind, you don't really need... There's nothing wrong with using proper purpose-built surface primers. There's absolutely nothing... And the one that I use is a surface primer. But you don't need to use a surface primer. Any sort of matte paint will give a really good finish for the subsequent layers to stick to. And you can protect it much more efficiently by spraying with varnish after you finish painting. So what I always tell my students is, if you don't have an airbrush or you don't want to use rattle cans, just use thin matte black paint to prime your miniatures and then varnish them afterwards. Because in terms of actually protecting them, you're not losing any efficiency. And in terms of surface adhesion, something that's good for the paint to cling to, that matte paint is actually probably better for paint to cling to than my satin surface primer. You know, the more matte the surface is, the more sort of on a microscopic level, the more little pockets there are for subsequent layers of paint to sit in and stick to and grab hold.
Interesting.
So proper primer understanding is it's kind of one of those things that, you know, mini painting hasn't been around as long as other forms of painting, and so there's a little bit of confusion there, a little bit of misunderstanding of why we're doing things, and it's not to do with what the products do. People understand what the products do. They know what primers do, but they don't understand why we're priming our miniatures, you know, and protection isn't really why we're priming our miniatures, because protection we can gain much more efficiently, as I say, with a varnish. So for the next stage, once we've got all of this in, we're now going to begin highlighting. So we'll go back to our blue-grey again, and I'll pull my palette forward again, and I'm just going to touch some white into it. Not a lot, just a little, and a bit of water. And again, you can see that this paint is fairly thin. If you can see, it's, you know, it's reasonably thin. but it's thinner than our initial blue-grey was, but it's not as thin as our black glazes were. And what we're going to do now is, this is called layering. Within our blue-grey areas, we're now just going to layer some secondary highlighting. So that means that we're always sticking inside that really bright blue-grey that we mixed. We're always making sure that we stay inside that. But we're not really needing to blend as much here, because we actually want these highlights to be a bit more stark, you know, because we want the contrast that that will bring. We're only a little bit lighter. It's not like we've really drastically lightened our paint here. But you can immediately see how much the contrast has gone up on that leg panel now. You see the difference between my bright areas and my dark areas is starting to become a lot more pronounced. And remember, of course, as I said, I am recording this for content, Joe. So when it goes up, you will be able to re-review this entire video. I always record lessons anyway, so that I can supply a video of the lesson for the students so that they can re-watch it and re-reference things. But obviously, in your case specifically, because you've said I can use it for content, yours will actually be available on YouTube for you and whoever else to see.
Oh crap!
What have you done?
I actually went over and highlighted all of the blues, so I didn't see that I was supposed to leave some of the blues. So I think I will just start that part over real quick.
What you can do is you can probably rescue that just by stepping back to your medium grey, and I'll show you on my paper here. So if you've got an area of this light grey painted in whatever shape. Oh, there's my doorbell.
Oh.
My doorbell only ever sounds when I'm recording for content. So if you've got an area of this light grey, and you've accidentally filled out all of your transition, you can probably just ease it back in just by sort of painting around the edges of it with your slightly darker grey.
Okay.
You can see that it immediately stands out.
Okay.
You'll probably be able to just rescue it that way.
Okay.
And we are going to do one more stage of highlight as well. So we're going to add a dot more white into our light grey.
Okay.
And take it even further. And obviously, each time we go brighter with our highlight, we also shrink the amount of area that we're highlighting into.
Okay.
So that's how we create that sort of transition from dark to light. And this is the kind of stuff, when you start to get to these really fine points of the highlights, when when you're pretty new on your painting journey, this kind of thing's gonna feel difficult, because it's very fine motor control that not many other hobbies really ask for. So most people don't have any experience of needing that level of fine motor control until they start trying to paint miniatures. But it is one of those things that, I can assure you, it does improve with practice. And my painting style in particular really tries to minimize how often we have to use it, because I shake a lot.
Shake. Oh, shake.
I shake a lot, yeah. I don't have the steadiest hand. I have techniques at my disposal to help me have a steadier hand, but...
About to say, with your end results, you could have fooled me.
You can see here, we've got a really nice sort of light to dark build up now. You can see that even if we look at the blue-grey area, you can see the blue-grey is much darker down here than it is up here. And so we've just pushed the intensity all the way up towards the top. And then, like, if you want to, if you really want to start showing off, you can grab a little bit of pure white and you can just sort of dot in some really highly reflective areas with your pure white. And this is kind of, you know, party piece level highlighting now. You don't need to go this bright, but some people like to. And as I explained before, you know, the more contrast we include, the more it's going to grab people's eye and make them go, holy shit, that's cool.
That's what we're all shooting for, right?
Yeah, I mean, the big secret, though, is kind of learning how we evoke those responses in people. The actual difference in physical skill level between the best miniature painters and, you know, the journeyman is not as wide a gulf as people would like to believe. You know, a lot of people say, oh, it'd take me 50 years to get that good. You know, you hear those kind of things a lot. And especially when you're a professional painter that puts out a lot of, you know, higher quality work into the world regularly, you often hear people saying, you know, oh, it'd take me years to get as good as you. And the secret that we all sort of secretly know between us, but the general public doesn't, is that actually the skill gap between, you know, a really solid painter and a beginner it's not a huge wide gulf. It's the knowledge gap that's the big difference. It's that we know what painting techniques and applications to use to elicit those wow responses from people. And that's really the big secret of it all, is that selecting the right techniques and applications is how you achieve those brilliantly painted miniatures. Again, I'll zoom this close now just so that you can actually see the brushwork that's in it. When you see the brushwork, you can kind of understand that it's not as brutally difficult as it looks from a distance.
Yeah.
You know? But when you actually see it at normal eye level, and all those blends kind of differ into each other because your eye can't read them as separate colours, that's when you start to understand, you know, the magic of it all. I'm sitting here kind of micromanaging now, just modifying my blends, tidying up little, you know, literally tidying up single brush strokes and stuff like that. And if you want to go into that level of minutia with your finishing, then, you know, you can do that. I'll sometimes do stuff like this with commissions. It's very rare that I'll do it with my own stuff, but, you know, with a commission I will sometimes actually sit there and make these little micro corrections. But the main thing is you can see that really high contrast. So what I'm going to start off with doing is I'm just going to paint his entire plume with red.
Okay.
You said you had some Citadel shades, right?
Yeah, I've got about 12 Citadels and 8 artist scale.
I meant specifically the shade paints, the washes.
I've got the Agrax.
Yeah. Do you want to grab that as well then, because you're going to need that for this workup?
Okay, but I don't need to thin that or anything, right?
No, that's just straight out of the pot. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yes.
I have to say, when I'm recording normally for videos, I don't usually paint this much on camera. I'll paint the first minute or two on camera to get enough footage to show what I'm trying to show. And then I'll move the camera out of the way so that I could, I'll stop paying attention to the camera so that I can kind of just paint however I'm comfortable. And it's been a little while since I've done a private lesson, so I forgot how much added difficulty there is in having to stay underneath the camera the whole time that you're working. It's quite interesting. It reminds me of when I used to stream.
Do you miss it?
No, not at all. Not even a little bit. I really don't. Because the thing is, like, all the people in the community that I was really close to and that I had really good relationships with kind of stuck with me when I moved to YouTube. You know, they joined my Discord and they continued to sort of interact with me regularly. Even if they didn't necessarily join the Discord, a lot of them continued to interact with me regularly over social media and stuff like that. So, you know, for me, streaming was about the people. It was very focused on the people, and all the people who, you know, made it special when it was a regular thing kind of stuck around. So it never really mattered. There was never really any loss to switching the format of my work. Whereas the gain, of course, is that, you know, for stuff like this, for tuitional stuff, where you're trying to, you know, demonstrate things to people, videos are just a much, much more efficient method of doing that. You know, because people want to be able to, like, watch things back and they want to be able to scrutinize, and you can't do that with a live stream.
Yeah.
Even with a VOD, you know, like, who wants to sit there and pick through a 5-hour VOD to find the bits that they want to know?
Yeah. True. Not naming specifics, is there anybody that you wish didn't come over that you wish did in the Discord? Or pretty content with the posse you got?
I mean, look, there's standout people who used to be regulars in the streams, but they're people who are very married to Twitch, and so the fact that they didn't come over, I kind of always knew that they wouldn't come over. So it's like, it's hard to really say that I miss them per se, because I kind of already knew when I decided to make the changeover that those were people who hung out on Twitch every day and only followed mini painters on Twitch. They weren't interested in mini painting YouTube at all.
Okay.
So, you know, the decision was made kind of already knowing that those people wouldn't stick by, and so, you know, it never really had an effect for that reason. But, you know, at the same time, like, it's definitely there were definitely people amongst them who I wasn't really in contact with on social media, so, like, I don't get the kind of fun and banter with them anymore as much. And I can't, you know, you miss that, but streaming in general is a platform where, you know, there is a lot more fun and banter and back and forth, and, you know, it's a much more interactive platform than YouTube, and so, you know, that again, it was something that I was prepared for. You know, I always knew that there would be less banter and interaction and back and forth when I moved away from streaming.
Okay.
But it means that I can also focus more on social media and Discord, which is a lot, you know, it was something that it was very hard for me to give those things the amount of attention that they deserved when I was streaming, because streaming would consume so much of my social energy that by the time I'd finished a 5 to 8 hour stream, I didn't have the energy to be hanging around on social media or hanging around in Discord socializing. You know, it was gone.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, like, you know, on one hand, it's very easy to say, you know, I miss this person or I miss that person or whatever. But on the other hand, having so much more social energy to be able to dedicate to my work-related social media means that I can, you know, do stuff like this. For example, you know, I can give my patrons one-on-one lessons. Where would I fit a one-on-one lesson in when I was streaming 5 to 8 hours a day every day of the week?
Yeah.
You know, where would that lesson go? Like, I can do this now, but I couldn't do that then. So this is, you know, this is interaction. What we're doing now is interaction that I never could have done before. So I think you gain more than you lose, and it's very easy to think about what you've lost, but, you know, I think it's far more important to concentrate on what you've gained. You all base coated red now?
Yes.
Okay. So obviously we need to let that dry. what I do, I'm just going to mute my mic for a second.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And now if I unmute my mic... Actually, I've just realised you're hearing my mic through Discord, so whilst I muted it on the recording software, you probably heard the motor of the hairdryer there.
It actually cut out, surprisingly. Like, I hear it every now and then, but yeah, not too loud at all.
Okay, that's pretty good. And then a quick second coat. If you don't have access to a hairdryer, you can't hairdryer your miniatures between coats, but I definitely recommend having one for your hobby desk.
Is blowing on it kind of a a no-no? So
sure, that's all good. So sorry, I just need a little bit more red on my palette. I didn't quite get myself enough out. So the next thing, this is obviously your much more kind of Games Workshop style treatment of this workup initially. So we're just gonna use Agrax Earthshade all over the surface.
mm-hmm.
The way you apply these shade paints, basically you want to be much more liberal with them than you are with your normal paints. So you see my brush here is very heavily loaded.
Oh yeah.
And this will probably do pretty much this entire area. But you can see because it's thin, it instantly sinks into all of the recesses. And it just sort of stains the surfaces. And then if you have got a bit too much in any areas, you can just kind of dry your brush off a little bit and pull it away. And your brush will sort of wick it away from the main surface. There you are. That's essentially what Citadel shades do. You can see I've got that nice kind of dark contrast now in all of the recessed parts of the hair. And again, these take quite a while to dry, so this is another time where having a hairdryer is really, really useful.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously you're not going to have that option, so we'll have to skip past it. But what we'll actually do is, while we're waiting for that to dry, we'll prepare our next area of work by base coating some gold.
Oh, yes.
So once you've got that Agrax Earthshade in, grab your Retributor armor and we'll just start base coating some gold. That way, with any luck, by the time we finish this base coating of gold, shade will be pretty much dry. I should point out, not necessarily for your benefit, but for the benefit of people that watch this back on YouTube,
Mm-hmm.
This was a fully painted miniature that I sprayed over in black just to show Joe the stuff that I wanted to show him for this lesson. So the detail on this miniature is actually already a little bit obscured. Don't think that there's anything wrong with it or that it's like been cast badly or anything like that. The miniature itself is absolutely fine. It's entirely my doing that has caused it to be like that. There's just a little bit of detail missing from it. It's not a lot, it's barely noticeable, but you know how YouTube comments are, Joe. If you do anything wrong, they'll find it.
Oh, yeah.
And they'll tell you. Sometimes even if you haven't done anything wrong, they'll find it and they'll tell you. One of my favourite ones was somebody commented on a video quite recently saying the audio's out of sync. You should take the video down and re-upload it. Like, well, thank you for telling me how to manage my YouTube channel. Like, do
You
you
know, you were on the market for a new, right?
for a new what?
A YouTube manager, right?
Yeah. Right. Some of the comments people make are very funny, though. You know, like, do you not think that I know the audio is desynced and have tried to do something about it? It's just a thing that can happen sometimes, you know. And when you're a small independent creator, like, you don't have the time to reshoot everything that goes wrong. You know, sometimes when something goes wrong, it's fairly manageable to reshoot it, but some stuff, when it goes wrong, you can't reshoot it. You don't have the time or the facility to reshoot it, and so sometimes you just have to work with the dodgy footage, you know. And even when you look at really amazing content creators like Miniac and Squidmar, you know, like the top people in the sort of mini painting content creation circle, like, they'll still have footage in some of their videos where there's issues. You know, like, it literally happens to everyone. It happens to the best, and
Yeah.
you can't always fix it. So you think about that, YouTube, when you're commenting on people's videos. If there's a problem and it's very, very obvious to you, it was probably very obvious to them too, which means there's probably nothing they could do about it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have released the video with the issue still there. You just consider that before you go telling people how to run their channels. It's one of the things I like about YouTube, though, comment sections. It's always a very nice sort of capsule of the best and worst of internet humanity at the same time.
Oh yeah, if you want a great example, just go to the female space.
The female Space Marines video.
Some absolute dorks on there.
It's, yeah. I mean, look, I didn't make that video not expecting it to be polarizing, right? You know, I knew when I made it that it would be polarizing. The subject itself is polarizing, but it's definitely it's quite surprising the lengths some people will go to make a point that doesn't need to be made.
Oh, and to justify it on top of that.
Yeah, it can be quite remarkable. It can be quite remarkable. But, you know, at the same time, like, you also, you know, you have to acknowledge that people's passion, you know, even if the point of what they're saying doesn't agree with what you believe, if they didn't have that passion, it wouldn't be a subject worth discussing, right? And so,
That's fair.
you know, you have to be, at least on some level, grateful to the people you disagree with, because they allow the discussion to exist. And if the discussion doesn't exist, you don't have a forum in which to try and make what you think is an important point. You know,
Yeah.
so,
Fair.
like, on the subject of people who, you know, who disagree with female Space Marines because of some form of bigotry, like, those people can fuck off. Obviously, nobody's got time for that. Nobody cares about what those people think. But the people that are actually trying to, you know, they're trying to sort of rationalize the argument and explain their thoughts and feelings, and, you know, they're being civil about it, and, like, you can't be mad at that, even if they don't agree with you.
Oh, sure. How many people do that, though?
Well, it is the internet, Joe. It is the internet. It is mostly for swearing at strangers. That's kind of what the internet exists for.
Oh, is it only limited to the internet anymore? Yeah, U.S. presidential debates.
Well, I don't know. I think that, you know, the difference is the likelihood of swearing at strangers in reality. Most people are smart enough to know that in the real world, swearing at strangers isn't the best idea. Whereas, you know, on the internet, people are very quick to be mean to people they don't know.
I love this Retributor armor color.
It's so nice, isn't it? It just covers so easily. That's the thing I really like about it. Most gold paints really do not cover very easily. Gold is one of those colors that does not like to cover. And,
really?
Yeah. I mean, even if like you've seen enough of my videos where I've used Vallejo dark aluminium, you know, it's like my holy grail of silver paints.
Oh yeah.
And silver paints traditionally cover pretty well anyway, but Vallejo Dark Aluminium, despite being really, really thin, still covers beautifully. And so, you know, because of that, I thought to myself, oh, well, I better get the Vallejo Metal Color Gold as well then, because I bet, you know, if the Dark Aluminium's this good, the gold's got to be fucking incredible. And I tried the gold a few weeks back, and it's really not, it's not on the same level as the Dark Aluminium. Gold paint just doesn't like to cover. Even the other Citadel golds, in fact. Citadel has, I think, 2 other golds.
Oh, really? Did not know that.
And they're not nearly as high coverage, not even close. How's your shade paint doing? Is it anywhere closer to dry yet?
Oh crap.
It's okay.
Lost it for a second. It's mostly dry. There's a couple spots at the bottom of the plumes that are.
Yeah, that's okay. I've still got a couple of wet spots as well. You can carry on base coating. That's fine. So once you've got all that Agrax dry, what you're then going to want to do is, first of all, with your same red again, the red that's underneath the Agrax, just do some more of that side brushing first of all, just to start picking up some of that top detail. So the same way that we've been side brushing other details at other points on the miniature, we can just side brush this to start to bring back out some of that red color. This is basically just because we don't want all of our surfaces to be stained really, really brown by that Agrax. We just want our shadows to be brown.
Oh.
So okay. we're just using this to kind of reset the area to a nice red tone before we start to build in the highlights. And then there's quite a few different approaches to highlight in red. And they're mainly kind of dependent on how you want it to look as a finished workup, whether you want it to look more natural or whether you want it to look more kind of comic booky. So what I would normally advise is, if you're going for a more natural red, then mix flesh tones into your red to create your highlights. Because red naturally reflects kind of a pinky tone, but sort of with a warmth to it. Like if you look at your sweater in the video feed at the moment, the highlights are definitely all in a sort of pinky direction, but they've got like a warmth to them.
Okay.
So when you're trying to create kind of natural looking red tones, that's what you want. But when you want that more kind of aggressive comic booky sort of over the top look, you'll instead highlight up through yellows and oranges. And that looks more aggressive, so it creates that more kind of punchy finish. So to achieve that, like, there are pre-mixed paints that I will often use if I'm doing a workup, especially for YouTube. I will often use pre-mixed paints, but when I'm doing it for like a commission or whatever, I'll usually just take Mephiston Red and just keep adding more and more yellow into it and building up highlights. So you'll see this first layer is just with a little bit of yellow added into the Mephiston Red.
And this is all side highlight stuff.
Yeah, I'm still side brushing, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, like, you know, for the front hairs, you might want to use the tip of your brush like that for the front couple, but it's pretty, especially because I'm on camera, so I can't drag the miniature close to my face. It's kind of hard for me to sort of accurately do that, so I'm trying to just side brush as much as possible, because with the camera and the microphone in the way, I can still be fairly accurate doing that. But you can see that just this first little build up of orange kind of already starts to create some pretty noticeable highlight. Just dump some more yellow in there to get that even brighter. And this time we'll focus more towards the tips. So we'll sort of just isolate the tips of different strands and focus more towards those.
Oh, so totally irrelevant to painting, I have been on a tear of watching 8 out of 10 cats videos on Facebook. That is a hilarious show.
It's so popular over here, but I really don't like Jimmy Carr.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Just too much for you?
I don't know. I think the thing that kind of put me off of him is that I saw some of his stand-up comedy,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just kind of all one-liners and just really crass.
Yes.
And I tend to prefer slightly more intelligent stand-up comedy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my favorite stand-up comedians are like Bill Hicks and Eddie Izzard, people like that.
Okay.
So I don't know, that there wasn't really enough intelligence, I guess. That sounds really hooty of me, and I'm not trying to be.
I don't
But
know. It's not wrong.
but yeah, I don't know. I found his comedy difficult to enjoy, which is a shame because, like I say, it's really popular over here. So
Mm-hmm.
being able to enjoy it with other people is nice. But
Mm-hmm. I like Sean the best from the show. I think he's just got the best delivery. I just love a good delivery on stuff.
yeah, comedy is it tends to be one of those things for me that, like, if I get into a comedian, then I kind of, really, really get into them. Like, I love their work, and I will always feel kind of entertained by it. But by and large, it's just such a small proportion of the kind of entertainment that I consume.
Mm-hmm.
Just to very briefly comment on the work again. So what I've been doing here is just building up more and more and more yellow and going more and more towards the tips. And at the point that I'm starting to get quite kind of fiery coloured like this, I've just added a touch of white into my yellow now, just to put some final bright highlights in. Just in the sort of last couple of sections. And again, like I say, it's a little bit tricky for me to do this with the microphone in front of me. So there's a few mistakes in mine which would not necessarily be present in yours, but
I'd say if anyone was going to have noticeable mistakes, I'm pretty sure it'd be mine.
I don't know. The problem is it's a little bit tricky to correct certain mistakes when you can't get in really, really close to them. And it's just so, like, normally, if I just move my microphone out the way for a second, normally if I'm painting something really carefully, I'll be like this, and you can already see my head's in the way of the camera.
Mm.
So if I was like working on a commission or something, then I would be that close to the miniature, and so as a result, it's a lot easier for me to fix mistakes or to just not make them in the first place. But when I'm doing this, I've got a microphone between me and the miniature, so I can't physically move my head closer to it, because literally just off camera here, you see where my fingers are.
Oh yeah,
They're about an inch away from the microphone, and then my head is about sort of 4 or 5 inches further away. So I just don't have the option to be able to get close to the work and see it properly. Yeah, once your oranges start to get kind of pretty bright, then you can just start mixing a little bit of white in and just creating some nice little white reflections here and there. You can see when that's finished, it's quite a nice sort of brightly highlighted red mane. And using that side brushing technique really makes it a lot easier to pull off as well.
yeah. I'm really liking the results right now.
Sorry?
I said I'm really liking the results on my.
Well, that's good. That's good news.
Yeah, the technique really makes it easy.
Yeah, I think that side brushing technique, I think you see it sometimes in Games Workshop's tutorials, but they kind of I don't think they really ever illustrate just how fine you can go with it, like just how minute you can detail something using that technique.
I thought you were going to make a pun that they just brush over it.
Apparently, I'm saving the dad jokes for you today. Try when you're applying your strokes. Try to concentrate on not lifting your brush off of the miniature too often.
Oh, okay.
Try to complete the area that you're painting in as few strokes as possible. Instead of flicking at it like this, try to just run a single. Sorry, I just realised I explained that whilst being off camera. What I was saying was, instead of sort of flicking at it like this, try to complete as much of the length of the run in one stroke as possible.
Okay.
Before you lift the brush off. It'll feel a little bit weird at first, but it will allow you to develop the kind of muscle memory that you need to be able to run longer, straighter lines. And remember, because you're side brushing, the brush should be acting as a guide for you anyway and helping to prevent you from misstepping. So you don't need to be too panicky, too worried about accidentally misbrushing.
Okay.
As long as you're keeping that paint load minimal, it's very hard to make mistakes when you're side brushing.
Okay, that does make a big difference.
Yeah, I do quite like this Custodes colour scheme that you've come up with. I might actually finish this guy. When I send your commission back, I might send him in with it.
No, get out. Thank you.
We'll see. I'm not promising anything. you know you know what I'm like for time these days.
Well, you're already giving me enough freebies, so you certainly...
Nah, you deserve it.
No, stop. So then, so I've got some orange. I like the orange mixed in here. So then just go like really low with a hint of red.
Just a touch of white into it, to sort of pick up those edges.
Oh, okay.
You know, you're really just trying to pick up the odd tips here and there, just to create that sort of sense of reflection.
Oh, roger that.
So just a little touch of white here or there into your orange, and just catch some of the very ends. And the nice thing about hair is that when you look at hair, it's very sort of multifaceted in how it interacts with light. You'll see a lot of different things going on at once. So you can create convincing hair without needing to be super consistent in your painting.
Ooh, it's a bit too much. Bit too yellow.
A little bit too bright.
Yeah, I don't know if I can accurately.
You can always, if you're quick, if you make a mistake with the paint and it's like too bright or anything like that, you can sometimes just thumb it off as long as you're really quick with it.
Oh.
So just bear that in mind. If you ever put a color down and you're like, oh shit, that's too bright, you just quickly sort of push it off with your thumb and it'll usually come off.
Okay.
As long as you're pretty immediate. But that looks pretty good from here. I know we discussed that, you know, you're not quite as well lit as I'd like you to be, but I think I can see what's going on. It looks pretty decent.
I like, these final highlights are pop. This is just what I wanted to see.
Yeah, it just brings in that little sort of, you know, that nice sense of third dimension to the area. Adds that look of depth. It's all about you know, as I keep stressing through this lesson, it's just all about pushing contrast. Contrast is what wows people, much more so than accuracy and, you know, anything like that. Like, understanding how to push contrast is going to be the main thing that makes your paint jobs look more impressive.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to send me a photo?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I will try to remember to splice these photos into the finished video as well. Come on, Discord. Come on, Discord.
Oh, and then here was the finish on my highlights too. Send that. So, 3 files coming your way.
They're just making the transatlantic flight at the moment. Oh, I thought they'd hit some traffic, but it looks like they're here. Okay, what we're working with here. Yeah, see, that hair looks fantastic, dude.
Thanks.
Really good. Really, really good. Excellent work. Yeah, your highlights definitely look a lot more deliberately placed now as well. You'll start to figure out sort of how to place them when as you see more miniatures completed to a higher standard. You will start to kind of get a grip on how far to go with things like highlighting. Like I say, I'm going to send you a photograph of this anyway to look at. So, or I'll continuously send you photographs, and obviously you've got a commission coming from me that's going to be in this scheme as well. So we will we'll have some examples. So the gold is the next part. Now this is the one part of the work up here that you might struggle to. Hang on a second. That you might struggle to follow completely, because I don't believe you've got any of the Vallejo Chrome, have you?
No, I do not have that. I've got Iron Warriors. Is that the same thing?
That won't be bright enough for what I'm about to show you. So you'll be able to do the first couple of stages of this, but you won't be able to finish it until you've got a nice bright silver paint. You're going to need a really, really bright silver paint for highlighting gold.
Oh, wait, hold on. Do I... Oh, no. No, I don't. I thought I had the artist scale, but
No, they don't have any metallics in that range.
Oh, do they not?
No. Because it's designed for traditional painting, so you would do NMM for all of your metallics.
Ooh, okay.
So basically with this gold, the first step is just, obviously, once it's all base coated in, is just to shade it with Retributor armor. With Rakeland Flesh Shade. So...
Oh, that's what that's for.
Yeah.
I bought it, and I was like, I know I have to buy it, but I don't know why.
Yeah, so this is what your Rakeland Flesh Shade is for. It's for shading your gold, and you can instantly see the transformation. I mean, it's immediate, and it's drastic, and it looks really good. They also actually make a gloss version of this that's specifically designed for shading gold. And I do really, really like it. I just don't happen to own it for some reason.
From GW?
Yeah. It's just a glossy version of this exact same shade paint, but it's really good to put it over metallics. What I'll do then is I'll just quickly whip through this workup for you just to demonstrate it to you, and then you can, obviously, once you've acquired the paints, you'll be able to watch the video back to do it that way.
Okay.
So I'm just going to mute the mic for a second while I hairdry this.
Okay.
Okay. So the reason I said about that Vallejo Chrome paint, so this workup actually came into my repertoire fairly recently. I've been kind of trying to come up with a better way to paint gold for a while now, because I don't really like GW's way of doing it, but I also didn't really like my own way of doing it. And so I've kind of developed this workup for gold fairly recently, but it relies on this, which is Chrome from Vallejo Metal Color.
Okay.
And it's a very, very, very bright silver, but it doesn't have super high coverage. It's just extremely bright. You can see just how bright it is. And when you build up a bunch of it, it turns really reflective. So what you're able to do, I'll just drag my palette into the camera here so you can kind of see what I'm doing. What you're able to do is if you grab some of this Retributor armor and dump a bit of this chrome into it, you see it instantly, not only does it thin it a little bit, but it also really raises the value of it.
Yeah.
Like, quite dramatically. If you compare that to that. So this allows you to put in sort of really nice highlights with this very bright looking gold. But what's really wonderful about it, and what I'll actually do here is I'll leave half of this shield unpainted so that you can compare the two and see the difference. Again, I'm mostly side brushing here, just kind of using the detail on the sculpt. But what you'll see is as I start to now mix more of this in to create additional layers, as you start to layer up this chrome, it becomes really, really reflective. And it's that reflectiveness of it that makes it such a nice way of highlighting gold, because it allows you to create that really expensive looking, realistic, bright gold. Which, when you follow the sort of standard Games Workshop workup, you don't really get that super bright reflectiveness.
Wow, yeah, you can already really tell the different camera.
Yeah, it's another really nice thing about it is it shows up really well on camera, which is great news for me.
Yeah, so you're really just edge or side painting and just highlighting the raised stuff, right?
Yeah, I'm just picking out anything that sort of is a raised detail and just giving it gentler and gentler licks with brighter and brighter mixtures of these two paints. And eventually we'll get up to such a bright color that it practically looks silver. And we can just sort of touch this in just in some really isolated little spots here and there to create a really nice bright gold. So yeah, sorry I didn't check the colors with you beforehand. I thought I had told you to pick these up, but you know how I be with being forgetful.
No, and I found that I didn't even leave the store with red either. I had to order that separate. I probably just forgot a few things when I was in the store.
But you can see, if you look at the very sort of dull left side of the shield, and then you look at how bright and reflective that right hand side is. But you see, when I tilt it away from the light, you can see it's still very much gold. There's no doubt that it's a gold.
Yeah.
It's just very, very reflective and rich. And for custodies, when they have so much gold on them, that's such a great look.
Yeah, that does look good.
So that's a very, very nice little, super quick gold workup. And then the other thing I wanted to show you was how to paint the silvers. Because, again, this incorporates metallic. So obviously you're going to be using your Iron Hand Steel as the base color. But you are going to need to go out and buy a brighter silver, because you're going to need a brighter silver both for the gold workup and for this silver workup as well. So you're going to start out basically with your darker steel color, and this is for things like the bolt gun and the blade. And once again, you see the power of Vallejo dark aluminium here. It's just such high coverage paint. We're just going to get all of our silver areas very quickly colored in. And what I would probably do with these Custodes blades is actually paint the edges of the blade silver, but this middle sort of boss that's on the fuller of the blade, I would probably paint gold.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so just to create some contrast. So this little center detail here, I'll probably repaint in gold afterwards.
Okay.
Again, I'm just going to quickly mute for the hairdryer. Yeah, that's dry enough to work with. So again, when you want these really bright, shiny silvers, this is where we use these gloss shades.
Okay.
And the advantage that these have is because they're glossy, they don't restrict the reflectiveness of the metallic paint. So you can see this metallic paint is already kind of reflecting light for me. And when I paint it over in this gloss shade paint, it will still reflect really nicely because we've used a gloss shade paint, not a normal matte one. Again, we don't want too much excess on there, so if it gets a bit too built up, we just dry the brush off and just pull away the excess with a relatively dry brush. And then, again, just muting for the hairdryer a second. Okay, so here's now where you're going to see the magic. Because we've used that gloss wash, you see it's still really reflective and bright.
Yeah.
So now what we can do is, as we build highlights into this, and if you've looked at the recipe book, this is the silver workup that's in the recipe book.
Oh, okay.
You know, there's that really bright reflective silver workup in there that I use for my Blood Angel successors. But what we're going to do now is just mix some of our bright silver into our dull silver paint, and much the same as we treated the Aquilon Eagle on the shield, we're going to treat the blade in the same respect, just picking out raised surfaces with this brighter silver color. And again, because these Viejo metal color metallics are so thin, you can kind of almost treat them a bit like a glaze. So they'll sort of go on a little bit transparent at first, which allows you to just kind of plot in where you want them, and then you can apply a couple of extra coats once you know where you want them to kind of firm up how bright they end up being. You can see there I just used a few wiggly lines to create a little bit of texture. I'll just show you that one more time on the back here. So just touch this in and just wiggle my brush a little. And that's just going to create a bit of texture in there for me, instead of just having a completely flat highlight. Just puts a bit of visual interest in it. And then again, we can come all the way up to the actual chrome itself and get some really, really bright edge highlights just for the very, very tip of the sword, just to really make it punchy with some very, very bright, very, very nice looking metallic. And you can see, you know, the end result of this, it's a really bright, polished looking steel instead of those really kind of dull, poorly maintained silver metallics that you often see. And again, I think, you know, with Custodes, stuff like this really makes a difference because, you know, they are the Emperor's chosen legion. You know, they're supposed to like have really well maintained artisan equipment. You know, they're all wearing artificer armor, and you know, they've all got these storm shields and these beautiful unique weapons and stuff. And so I do think that the metallics should look well maintained. They should look really bright and shiny and polished, you know, and parade ready. So these workups that that I'm showing you for these two metallics, you know, they're a little bit different to what you'd normally be used to seeing, but they do help to just give you that slightly brighter approach. And as I say, you know, I'm going to send you photographs of all of this so that you can compare it to your own work. Obviously, you'll have access to this video so that you can watch back and continue to try and apply these techniques over the finished model. And then you do have a commission come in as well that's going to obviously be painted in this color scheme, so you will be able to see a complete miniature painted in this color scheme as well, which again will provide you with some sort of additional reference material for as you do your own guys.
Oh, that's awesome. I really appreciate it, Stu.
Do you have any questions, my good sir?
No, it just seems like a lot of... I'm going to have to try my hand at it to get a feel for it. Especially, I think the highlighting, like the first thing of highlighting we did, that's going to be...
This part?
Yeah, I think that's going to be something I have to really get a feel for.
Oh, it will be,
seems like a foreign concept.
Yeah, it will be. This, you know, it's... On a 2D surface, this is a very simple thing to do because you just, you know, pick a direction and all the light's coming from that direction and it's no problem. But on a 3D surface, you know, it still has to look convincing when you turn it around. And so, you know, that's why, like, I put a little slightly duller highlight in here, for example. was because when it's sideways on, we've got a nice plane of light visible here. When we view it from the rear, we sort of just start to see this second plane of light creeping in, and we've got a little plane of light here. And it's what sort of communicates this slightly more interesting. You can see when we view it from the front, we just start to see this part creeping in here. And it's just what creates these more sort of interesting framed, three-dimensional looking kind of lighting schemes. And it does, you know, it all takes a little bit of experimentation, a little bit of willingness to fail. That's one of the big things with learning stuff like this, you know, is willingness to fail. Don't expect perfection from yourself when you first start attempting these techniques, because, you know, you're not gonna execute this as well as someone who's done it hundreds of times on the first time that you do it. You know, but from the photographs that you've shown me, you've understood the concept of transitioning the colors, and that's probably the most physically difficult thing to do. So just learning how to place the actual highlights, which, like I said, you know, there's different information sources you can use for that. Like I said, you know, I like to use the physical lighting that's falling on my miniature. So for example, you see how I've got a little band of light just appearing in there?
Yeah.
Well, if I paint a highlight in there, then I now know to create a highlight there.
Okay.
Pop one in there, and you can actually, you know, you can map out your entire miniature this way before you even start doing any painting. So you can actually go around all of your armor and create a map of where you want all these highlights to live.
Okay.
Before
and do you do the highlights before or after? Like, I've got this or after putting the Iron Warrior color down?
So for your armor here, for your main armor color here, I wouldn't use the Iron Warrior at all.
Oh, okay.
Because the metallic flake that's in it will kind of force you to make certain other decisions.
I see.
Whereas starting off just with black will allow you to kind of have a bit more agency over how the finished look goes. Because what you were doing previously was you were painting it in Iron Warrior, and then you were shading it down to such a degree that it practically looked black anyway. It just had this sort of slight metallic flake to it.
Well, the first time I wasn't shading at all.
But I would say that you'll have a lot more control over it and a lot more opportunity to do your own thing with it if you go with a sort of black armor base, and then you use your metallic colors as accents. Okay.
And then do you agrax just the whole thing afterwards?
For these, I wouldn't.
Okay. Okay, so it's just black, put the highlights, and then put your metallics.
Exactly, yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
that's something I can do.
For Custodes, you know, they're fairly ornate sculpts, especially considering that they are essentially Space Marines, which, you know, we consider to be one of the less ornate types of miniatures. But for saying that they are, for all intents and purposes, Space Marines, they're pretty ornate. And so I think, you know, trying to keep the amount of fuss that you add to them fairly minimal will really serve you well for getting the most out of their look.
Okay.
So what I'm doing here is, just before we finish the session, I'm just creating a light map over the entirety of the miniature, and this is just going to show me where I would place all of my highlights. And like I said, I'm obtaining that information just by copying the reflections in the primer from my overhead light. So everywhere that my overhead light creates a reflection in the primer, I'm painting the start of a highlight on the miniature, which I'll then go back and refine using the same process that we did on the leg. And so this allows me to sort of, once I create this light map, I then don't have to keep kind of concerning myself with highlight placement, because I've already got it all kind of marked down, and I just need to do the work then.
Okay.
So something like that is pretty close. I mean, I should probably get a few little highlights just into this arm as well, just purely on merits of it's there, so you know.
And I'm assuming with red accents throughout, it's the same process. Hair where.
Yeah, I mean, things like red gems, you probably want to paint a little bit differently. Like, if I paint a red gem, what I'll normally do is, first of all, base coat it in with a red.
Okay.
And then, so gems have this weird way that they play with light that's a little bit different to other things. Mm-hmm. So, say when I base coat this gem in red, what I'm actually going to want to do is shade the top half of it, not the bottom half of it.
Okay.
So just give this paint a second to dry a bit. So yeah, because these guys have a lot of gems on them, it's kind of worth showing you a quick workup for gems.
Okay.
So what I'm doing here is just, I've taken like a mixture of black, red, and brown, and I'm just sort of starting to shade towards the top half of the gem.
Mm-hmm.
And then keep it sort of going brighter towards the bottom.
Okay.
And then start to apply our highlights to it kind of in a similar way to how we did previously. So you can, again, you can make a decision to come up through orange, or you can come up through pinks. It's kind of a preference thing.
Okay.
And eventually, once you've got the underside of the gem highlighted, you can then just drop in a little fine reflection on the underside.
You're using the chrome there?
This is white.
Oh, white, okay.
Just a little bright reflection on the underside. And then a little pinpoint reflection on the top.
Mm-hmm.
You can see that. And if I just, what I'll do is, where I've overspilt a little bit, I'll isolate that back out. And then I'll just knock a little dark line around it for you so that you can properly see what I've painted there. It can be a little bit confusing when it comes to metallics because they create so much reflection around them that it can be a little bit hard to see details in amongst them. But if I just isolate this with a thin black line, you'll be able to get a better idea of what I've done. There you are.
Oh, yeah, wow.
So you can see it's kind of highlighted towards the bottom, and then it's just got this little pinprick of white on the top of it.
Wow. Well, that is really cool.
And so what I would do is, once that's done, I use this stuff, which is, it's another Games Workshop product. It's just a gloss varnish. So you can use any old gloss varnish. You don't need to use Games Workshop's branded one. But once you've sort of painted the gem in that way, if you then give it a coat of gloss varnish, what you'll see is...
Oh, that's really shiny.
Yeah, it makes it look kind of like a real gem.
Mm-hmm.
And again, there's a bit of another sneaky peek at the rest of it. But so yeah, that's all the sort of basic workups for your Custodes. That's what you'll need. In terms of what colours you'll paint what, you know, you've got sort of the sashes and the little hanging parts between the legs. Those will probably be red. Any of the kind of filigree and embossing on the armour would be gold. The armor plates would be black with the grey highlighting. And then any sort of moving parts that are made of metal would be the silver workup. And between those 4 workups, and obviously the little gem recipe, you should be able to paint an entire custodian.
Yeah. Oh, this is awesome.
Should get you in pretty good shape to be able to paint a full one. And like I say, with this highlight map, I do recommend when you're quite new to concepts like doing blended highlighting and stuff like that, I do recommend going around the miniature and creating one of these highlight maps, because it's just going to take all the guesswork out of it for you. You can sort of do all the thinking in one session where you just kind of go around the miniature and plot in where all the light needs to live. And then once it's there's no more thinking to do. You've just got to paint. So you can just relax and enjoy the process of painting it. You know where you have to place all of these highlights, and all you've got to do then is all the blending within them, blending them up and blending them down and making them look nice. And as you gain more experience, you'll find that you no longer have to put these maps in. You'll just kind of know where to do it all, and you'll be able to, be a real smart ass where you can like lay down some wet black paint like this, and then get some wet blue grey paint like this, and while that black is still wet, you can just kind of place this highlight in and wet blend the edge of it into position without ever needing to do that sort of multiple stage process. You can see here, I've just got, this is just my blue grey paint and some black paint, and I'm just wet blending them together right there on the surface of the miniature.
Wow.
And once that dries, if it ever dries, just zoom you in close again. As you can see, that's already starting to blend. Obviously, I'd still need to work that for a little bit longer. I've literally just done one pass at it.
Right.
You can see just on the heel here, it's already starting to blend together. So once you start to get a bit more familiar with this idea of, how to place your lighting, you can just start placing 2 wet colors beside each other and blending them together into the correct position. But when you first start out, you want this light map first to kind of teach you where to place stuff. And so the reason I teach this glazing method instead of the wet blending version is because you can correct this more.
Oh, yeah.
If you fuck up a wet blend, you've basically got to start the wet blend again. It's just, it's just the nature of the beast, because you're taking a lot of control away from yourself. Whereas if you mess up a glaze, you've probably just got to sort of take one step back and redo that sort of the last process that you did, and then you'll be back up to looking good again. So my recommendation would be not to even attempt this kind of wet blending approach, and would be to stick with this kind of glaze blending approach that we've done on here. But this is what you're essentially building up to eventually, and then once you've got that initial wet blend in, then you can sort of build your more kind of targeted highlights up on top of it, as we same way that we did previously, basically, where we're just adding in our brighter and brighter colors as we go. And it's a lot quicker, which is why it's preferable in the long run to learn to paint that way, because you can get the same effect in less time. You can see that's all blended just on the heel there again. It's all nicely blended together, and it's taken far less time. But when you first start out, you're definitely going to want to go for this method, just because it's more slow and steady.
Okay. Yeah, it makes total sense.
Awesome. I think that's about everything then, isn't it?
Yeah. Wow, this is... I'm really... Once I get the right shades, I'm excited to get finished with this guy.
You'll be going for it. Awesome. All right, well, I'm going to stop rolling this footage because I think we've shown the world enough of this process, but we can carry on talking for a minute. Right, there you have it. That was probably about 2 hours of me and Joe just back and forth in and doing some painting. And, I threw in a few sort of extra little bits of information at the end of that lesson there as well. But what I now want to do is just very quickly show you some pictures of my miniature that I sent to Joe afterwards, and some pictures of his miniature that he sent back to me, just to kind of show you, what the product was of the lesson, give you a bit of an idea of, of what we actually did there. But other than that, I mean, that was it. The point of the video is really just a casual look at a very chilled, laid-back lesson and show you some cool stuff. And I just thought it was a nice little insight, a nice something different to stick up on YouTube and Some people might get a buzz from it. So folks, if you enjoyed it, do please click that thumbs up button to let me know that you liked it. If you want to subscribe to the channel and enable notifications, that's a good way to stay up to date on what I'm doing. And of course, if you want to continue to support the growth of the channel as I take this as my full-time job, there is a Patreon campaign with a link in the description, as well as a link to all of my social media. So thank you so much for sitting through this very lengthy video. I do hope that you enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next one, folks.